I mean, many things have changed in pictures, and technically everything's progressed a great deal, but you're still just as scared, and it's the same, you know.
Audrey Hepburn built her image on grace, kindness, and a calm presence that made it seem like nothing ever rattled her. But behind that image, there was one person she couldn't stand, and she kept it completely out of sight. There were no public arguments, no scenes, just a tension that lingered whenever they crossed paths, subtle enough to go unnoticed at the time, but strong enough that it never really went away. People didn't question it then, but looking back, it's clear something was off. And now, 46 years later, the truth behind that quiet resentment is finally coming into focus, revealing who she couldn't stand and what pushed her to feel that way in the first place. The making of Audrey, a childhood shaped by silence, war, and survival. Audrey Kathleen Rustin was born on May 4, 1929 in Brussels, into a life that looked refined on the surface, but was already layered with complexity beneath it. Her mother, Ella van Heemstra, came from Dutch nobility, tied to power, influence, and a long family history of status, while her father, Joseph Rustin, carried a mix of British and European roots, and later reshaped their name into Hepburn Rustin in an attempt to attach it to aristocratic lineage. From the beginning, Audrey's world moved across borders, between Brussels, London, Arnhem, and The Hague, creating a childhood that felt both expansive and unstable at the same time. For a while, everything held together. The family lived well and traveled often, and Audrey grew up surrounded by structure and expectation. But that sense of security didn't last. In 1935, her father walked out after a tense moment that was never fully explained, leaving behind a silence that would follow her for the rest of her life. That absence stayed with her in a way nothing else quite did, shaping how she saw relationships, trust, and emotional distance. Years later, she would still circle back to it, describing his departure as the most painful moment of her childhood, something that never really settled, no matter how much time passed. After the separation, her mother moved her to the Netherlands, and not long after, Audrey was sent to England for school, living under the name Little Audrey, adjusting once again to a new environment. But just as she began to settle, the world shifted again. In 1939, as war approached, her mother brought her back to Arnhem, hoping neutrality would offer safety. It didn't. When the Germans invaded in 1940, Audrey had to hide behind a new identity, Ella van Heemstra, because sounding English was suddenly dangerous. What followed was not just a loss of comfort, but a complete unraveling of everything familiar. The war tightened around her life in ways that left lasting marks. Her uncle was executed in retaliation for resistance activity, even though he had no direct involvement, a moment that shook the family deeply and forced a reckoning with beliefs that had once lent toward dangerous sympathies. Her half-brother Ian was taken to a labor camp in Berlin, while her other half-brother Alex went into hiding to avoid the same fate. The family itself was pushed into constant adjustment, moving to Velp to stay with her grandfather as the situation worsened. Amid all of this, Audrey found one fragile outlet: dance. She trained seriously in ballet, and during the occupation, she performed in private shows that raised money for the resistance, moving carefully in a world where even small actions carried risk. Whether delivering messages, helping where she could, or simply surviving day to day, she lived in a constant state of awareness that nothing was guaranteed. Then came the hunger. The winter of 1944 brought conditions that stripped life down to its barest form. Food became scarce, then almost non-existent, and like many others, her family survived on whatever they could find, even grinding tulip bulbs into flour just to have something to eat. The physical toll was severe. By the time the war ended, Audrey was dealing with malnutrition, illness, and the kind of exhaustion that doesn't disappear overnight. But even in that weakened state, survival didn't come to her by chance. Help arrived in an unexpected way, through a connection her mother had kept alive. A former British officer who sent supplies that could be sold for medicine, ultimately securing the penicillin that saved her life. It was a quiet turning point, one that marked the difference between losing everything and holding on just long enough to rebuild. By the end of the war, the life she had been born into no longer existed in the same way. The family's wealth had been reduced, their stability shaken, and the world she stepped into was nothing like the one she had known as a child. But what remained was something far more defining, a resilience shaped by loss, silence, and survival. The kind that doesn't show itself loudly, but stays just beneath the surface, influencing everything that comes after. From survival to spotlight, the rise that changed everything. When the war finally ended, Audrey didn't step into comfort. She stepped into rebuilding. Amsterdam became the starting point. She trained seriously in ballet under Sonia Gaskell, holding on to the one thing that had carried her through the war, while her mother worked as a cook and housekeeper just to keep them afloat. The contrast was sharp. A girl with discipline and elegance learning her craft by day, while survival still shaped everything around her. Her first appearance on screen came quietly, a small role in a Dutch educational film. But even then, there was already a sense that she wasn't going to stay in the background for long. That shift became real when she moved to London on a ballet scholarship, chasing something bigger, something that felt just within reach. She supported herself through modeling, dropped Rustin from her name, and tried to push forward as a dancer, but reality met her head-on. She was talented, no question, but the damage from years of malnutrition had left its mark, and she was told clearly that becoming a prima ballerina wasn't going to happen. That moment could have stopped everything, but instead, it redirected her. Acting wasn't the original plan, but it quickly became the path. She started in the background, with chorus roles in theater productions, moving through stage reviews, learning timing, presence, and how to hold attention without forcing it. At the same time, she worked on her voice, training, adjusting, remolding herself into something more versatile, something that could move between stage and screen. Then came the moment that shifted everything quietly, but decisively. While performing on stage, she was noticed by a casting director, and from there, doors began to open slowly at first. Small film roles followed, brief appearances that didn't yet define her but gave her space to grow. She moved through them steadily until she landed a more substantial role in Secret People, where she played a ballerina, finally merging her training with her screen presence in a way that felt natural. But the real turning point came almost by chance. While working on a film in Monte Carlo, she caught the attention of French writer Colette, who saw something in her that couldn't be ignored, and chose her for the lead role in Gigi on Broadway. At that point, Audrey had never performed on stage in that way before, but she stepped into it anyway, learning as she went, building confidence in real time. When the play opened, the response was immediate. Critics didn't just notice her, they locked onto her. She wasn't just present, she was the reason people paid attention. That momentum carried forward into film, and it led directly to the role that would change everything. Roman Holiday didn't just introduce her to a wider audience. It defined her in a way that few roles ever do. She played a princess stepping outside the boundaries of her world, and somehow, it felt effortless. There was a natural charm, a softness, and an honesty that made the performance land deeper than expected. It wasn't just well received, it was undeniable. She won the Academy Award, and just like that, she wasn't emerging anymore. She had arrived. From there, the pace didn't slow down. She moved into Sabrina's, holding her own in a story built around romance and transformation, proving that her appeal wasn't limited to one kind of role. Then came Breakfast at Tiffany's, where she stepped into something entirely different. Holly Golightly was bold, unpredictable, and outward in ways that didn't come naturally to her, and yet she made it work, shaping the character into something iconic. It became one of the most recognized roles in film, and her image in that black dress became something people would never forget. But what made her career stand out wasn't just the success, it was the range. She moved through genres without losing herself, from light comedies like How to Steal a Million to more layered stories like Two for the Road, where relationships were messy and real. Then she stepped into something darker with Wait Until Dark, playing a blind woman trapped in a situation that demanded tension, fear, and control all at once. It was one of her most intense performances, delivered at a time when her personal life was under strain, which only added to the weight behind it. By then, the image of grace and ease was firmly established, but underneath it was a career built on adaptation, resilience, and quiet persistence. Nothing about her rise was accidental. Every shift, every setback, and every unexpected opportunity shaped the direction she moved in. And by the time the world fully caught on, Audrey Hepburn wasn't just a star. She was something far more lasting. A love life that never sat still. Audrey Hepburn's rise to fame made everything look seamless, as if success and stability arrived together. But while her career moved forward with certainty, her personal life followed a far more uncertain path, one that kept circling back to the same quiet question of where she truly belonged. It started just as everything else was beginning. While filming Roman Holiday, the role that would introduce her to the world, she was also preparing to get married. James Hansen offered something solid, a future that was already mapped out, a life that promised structure and security. But even with everything in place, something felt off. She didn't ignore it. She stepped away before it was too late, walking out of a future that looked perfect on paper, but didn't feel right to live in. That decision flowed straight into the next chapter of her life. The success of Roman Holiday didn't just make her a star, it shifted everything around her. And it was in that shift that she met Mel Ferrer. He was older, already carrying the weight of a life lived before her, with 2 marriages behind him and children already part of his world, but there was a steadiness in him that she leaned into. When they worked together on Ondine, that connection deepened into something more defined, something that felt anchored, and by 1954, they were married, quietly, away from attention, just the way she wanted it. At the same time, her career was rising quickly, pulling her into bigger projects and wider attention. She moved into Sabrina, where she held her own alongside established stars, earning recognition that confirmed she wasn't just a passing presence. But it was also during this time that another layer of her personal life began to unfold. While working on that film, she formed a powerful connection with William Holden. It wasn't surface level, it carried weight, the kind of pull that disrupts everything else around it. Holden already had a family, a life that couldn't simply be undone, and yet the connection between them grew strong enough to matter. Even in the middle of that, she didn't lose sight of what she wanted for herself. She wanted a family, something lasting, something stable. And when she realized that Holden couldn't give her that, when she learned he had already closed that door in his own life, she stepped away. It wasn't because the connection wasn't real. It was because it didn't lead where she needed it to go. For a moment, it seemed like everything had aligned with Ferrer. Her career was expanding, her marriage was in place, and she was building a life that looked complete from the outside. But, as her work continued to grow, so did the distance within that marriage. It didn't happen all at once. It showed up gradually, in ways that were easy to overlook at first. While working on the nun's story, she grew close to Robert Anderson, another connection that reflected the shift already happening beneath the surface. At the same time, Ferrer's own infidelities became harder to ignore, creating a situation where both of them were moving away from each other while still holding onto the same structure. Alongside all of this, there were personal struggles that didn't stay in the background. Before becoming a mother, she had already gone through loss, a miscarriage, and a stillbirth, experiences that shaped how deeply she held on to the idea of family. When she finally gave birth to her son Sean in 1960, it became something central to her life, something that grounded her in a way her career never fully could. But even that came after difficulty, after moments that made the idea of motherhood feel uncertain. Over time, the weight of everything within her marriage became too much to carry. After 14 years, she and Ferrer separated, formally ending what had once felt like the life she was building toward. And yet, even that ending didn't bring the stability she had been searching for. In 1969, she married Andrea Dotti, stepping into another attempt at creating something lasting. This time, she shifted her focus more deliberately. She pulled back from the constant demands of Hollywood, choosing instead to build a quieter life centered around her children. With the birth of her second son, Luca, that focus deepened, and for a while, it felt like she had stepped into the version of life she had always wanted. But the same cracks appeared again, only this time they unfolded more publicly. Rumors of Dotti's affairs didn't stay contained. They grew, became visible, became something that followed her into the public eye. At the same time, she experienced another miscarriage, adding another layer to everything she was already carrying. The life she had tried to steady began to fracture again, and by 1982, that marriage ended as well. Even in the middle of that, her personal life continued to overlap with her work in ways that were never fully separated. While filming Bloodline, she formed a connection with Ben Gazzara, another man dealing with his own failing marriage. It wasn't built on illusions. It came from a shared place, two people navigating similar frustrations and finding comfort in each other for a moment that didn't extend beyond the circumstances that created it. By this point, the pattern had repeated itself enough to be clear. Relationships would begin with promise, grow into something meaningful, then shift under pressure, leaving her searching again for something that felt stable enough to hold. Then, almost quietly, everything changed. In 1980, she met Robert Wolders, and unlike everything that came before, this connection didn't begin with uncertainty or conflict. It developed steadily, without pressure, without the need to force it into a shape it wasn't ready for. They didn't marry, but what they had didn't feel incomplete. It held, in a way, her previous relationships hadn't, creating a sense of calm that had been missing for years. As her life moved further away from acting and toward humanitarian work, traveling with UNICEF, dedicating herself to something beyond the industry that had defined so much of her earlier life, Wolders remained by her side. He wasn't part of a moment. He was part of a phase that lasted. By the time her life reached its final chapter, the contrast was clear. The early years had been shaped by movement, by searching, by relationships that didn't settle where she hoped they would. But with Wolders, there was no sense of chasing something else, no feeling that something was missing just beneath the surface. What she had finally said stayed where it was, and for the first time, The question that had followed her for so long, the quiet search for where she truly belonged, no longer needed an answer. The grace she showed and the tension she hid. By the time Audrey Hepburn stepped onto the set of Breakfast at Tiffany's in 1961, she wasn't just another rising actress finding her footing. She was already established, already admired, already carrying a reputation that felt almost untouchable. Everything about her presence suggested ease, a natural rhythm that made even the most complex roles feel light. And when she took on Holly Golightly, that image only deepened. The character became iconic almost instantly, not just because of the story, but because of how completely she embodied it. Playful, yet guarded, charming, yet distant. The kind of performance that lingers long after the screen goes dark. But while the film would go on to become one of the most beloved classics in cinema, the experience behind the scenes didn't carry that same sense of ease. Beneath the polished surface, there was tension, and it centered on her co-star, George Peppard. On screen, he fit the role, convincing, composed, and exactly what the story needed. But off-camera, something didn't align. For someone like Audrey, who was known for being calm, cooperative, and easy to work with, that shift didn't go unnoticed. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, but it was clear. She didn't like him. And it wasn't a passing discomfort that faded over time. According to those who were there, her reaction was firm and immediate. Producer Richard Shepard later described it plainly, recalling that she saw Peppard as pompous, and, more than that she simply didn't like him at all. Coming from someone who rarely allowed tension to surface publicly, that kind of reaction stood out. It suggested something deeper than a minor disagreement, something that stayed present throughout filming. What makes it more telling is that she wasn't alone in that feeling. Others on set picked up on the same energy, the same friction that made working alongside Peppard difficult. Patricia Neal, who had known him before, noticed a change almost immediately. Where there had once been warmth, there was now distance, a coldness that hadn't been there before. She described it as a shift that was hard to ignore, one that turned what should have been a comfortable working environment into something far more strained. Even the director, Blake Edwards, found himself pushed to a breaking point, with tensions escalating so far that things nearly turned physical. So while the film itself carried a sense of lightness and charm, the environment it was created in felt very different. For Audrey, who had built her entire image on grace and composure, navigating that kind of atmosphere required something more than talent. It required restraint. She didn't escalate things or didn't allow the tension to spill into public view, but that didn't mean it wasn't there. It stayed contained and controlled, yet was unmistakable to those paying attention. And yet, despite all of that, the work didn't suffer. If anything, it rose above it. Breakfast at Tiffany's became one of the defining films of her career, and Peppard's performance, regardless of the tension behind the scenes, still stood strong alongside hers. That contrast is what makes the situation so striking. Two performances that worked seamlessly together on screen were built on a dynamic that, in reality, was anything but seamless. The story doesn't stop there, because this wasn't the only time Audrey found herself in an environment that tested her patience. Years later, when she returned to film Robin and Marian in 1976, she stepped into a very different kind of challenge. This time, it wasn't a co-star, it was the director. Richard Lester ran his sets with intensity, pushing for speed, for efficiency, for a pace that didn't leave much room to breathe. Scenes were shot quickly, pages moved through at a rate that demanded constant adjustment. And for someone like Audrey, who valued emotional depth and character development, that approach created friction. It wasn't just about the pace, though. It was about the story itself. As the script evolved, she found herself at odds with the way her character was being shaped, particularly when it came to the emotional core of the film. The romance between Robin and Marion wasn't just a background element to her, it was the heart of the story. And when she saw it being reduced, she pushed back. Not loudly, not disruptively, but firmly. She fought to preserve the integrity of the character, to make sure that Marion wasn't reduced to something less than what the story required. That tension carried into their working relationship. Even from their first interaction, there was a disconnect, a lack of warmth that set the tone for everything that followed. It wasn't explosive, but it was consistent, a quiet resistance that made the experience less than pleasant. And yet, just like before, she didn't let it define her behavior on set. She stayed composed, stayed focused, and continued to deliver what was expected of her, even when the environment made it difficult. What ties these moments together is not just the conflict itself, but how she handled it. In an industry known for strong personalities and difficult conditions, she moved through it differently. She didn't rely on confrontation to make her point, and she didn't allow frustration to override her professionalism. Instead, she held her ground quietly, maintaining the same sense of control that had always defined her. That's where the contrast becomes clear. On the surface, Audrey Hepburn represented grace, elegance, and ease, a presence that seemed untouched by tension. But underneath that image was someone who had to navigate difficult personalities, challenging environments, and moments that tested her patience more than anyone realized. She didn't escape those experiences. She absorbed them, managed them, and moved through them without letting them disrupt the image she had built. Audrey Hepburn utterly hated her. 46 years later, we know why. By the time Audrey Hepburn stepped into the 1960s, she wasn't just a star moving through roles. She had already built an image that felt steady, almost untouched, the kind of presence that made everything look effortless, even when it wasn't. But behind that image, there were moments where things didn't align as smoothly as they seemed, and one of the most talked about centered on a single role, a single decision, and a name that kept getting tied to hers, Julie Andrews. At the time, My Fair Lady wasn't just another project being developed. It was already something people felt belonged to someone. Julie Andrews had carried the role of Eliza Doolittle on Broadway, shaped it, and lived in it. And to many, there was no separation between her and the character. It felt settled before the film even began, like the transition from stage to screen would simply follow what had already been built. But the moment the studio stepped in, that certainty shifted. Jack Warner wasn't looking at it from the same place the audience was. For him, it came down to something more direct. Who could carry a film? Who could bring people into theaters? Who already had that pull? When he asked Andrews for a screen test, it wasn't just a formality. It was his way of making a decision. And when she pushed back, confident in what she had already proven on stage, that moment changed everything. The focus moved away from her almost instantly. And just like that, the role was no longer hers to step into. That opening didn't stay empty for long. Audrey Hepburn moved into it. By then, she wasn't an uncertain choice. She was already established, already trusted, already someone whose presence alone could carry a film. Projects like Roman Holiday, Sabrina, and Breakfast at Tiffany's had built that reputation. And when the offer came, it came with weight, including a salary that reflected exactly how much the studio believed in her. But even with all of that, the decision wasn't simple for her. She understood what Julie Andrews had done with the role. She knew how closely audiences held on to that version, and for a moment, she hesitated. It wasn't about capability. It was about stepping into something that already had a clear identity. But the situation around her narrowed the options. If she didn't take it, it wouldn't go back to Andrews. It would go to someone else entirely. And with that in mind, she accepted. From the outside, that choice created a story people held onto quickly. It looked like a quiet clash, one woman stepping into another's space, the kind of situation that usually leaves something unresolved behind it. But once filming began, the pressure shifted in a different direction. Audrey didn't walk into an easy production. She worked long hours, pushed through the demands of the role, and committed to shaping Eliza in her own way. But there was something happening behind the scenes that she wasn't fully aware of. The decision to dub her singing voice had already been made. While she trained, rehearsed, and gave everything she had to the performance, the final version of that work was being altered without her full understanding. When she found out, it didn't come with drama, but it hit just as hard. Not just because of the effort she had put in, but also because of what it meant in the middle of everything else. The narrative that she had taken the role from Julie Andrews was already there, already building, and now there was something else attached to it. Something that made her position feel even more exposed. She didn't push back publicly and didn't let it turn into a scene, but it stayed with her. When the film was released, the reaction followed that same split. The film itself succeeded, drawing audiences and earning recognition. But the conversation around her performance didn't settle cleanly. Some saw the work, others focused on what had been altered. And when award season arrived, the difference became clear. She wasn't nominated. At the same time, Julie Andrews stepped into Mary Poppins, her own transition into film, and everything aligned differently. She was nominated. She won. And suddenly, the story people had been building felt complete. One decision leading to another. One outcome balancing the other. But when you step away from how it looked and focus on what actually happened, the tension people expected doesn't hold in the same way. Because when they finally crossed paths at the Academy Awards, there was no distance, no coldness, no sign of something unresolved. Audrey approached her directly and acknowledged what most people had been saying quietly, that Julie should have done the role and that she herself hadn't had the space to turn it down. And instead of creating friction, that moment settled everything. What followed wasn't rivalry. It wasn't resentment. It was understanding. Julie Andrews never held on to the idea that something had been taken from her in a way that needed to be fought over. She spoke about Audrey with respect, even sympathy for how things had unfolded around her. And over time, whatever narrative had been built from the outside lost its form completely. What Audrey Hepburn movie is your favorite? Let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Also, click on the next video shown on your screen. You will enjoy it.